Welcome to episode 225 of the XS Noize Podcast, your go-to for deep dive conversations with the most compelling voices in music. I'm your host, Mark Millar. Thanks for listening. If you missed our last episode, I spoke with Paul Connolly, frontman of the Wood Burning Savages, about their second album, Hand to Mouth. It's well worth a listen if you haven't already. In this episode, I'm joined by Olly Knights from Turin Brakes. The band are celebrating a huge milestone with the release of their 10th studio album, Spacehopper. It's a record that captures both the spirit of their early days and the fresh sense of adventure. Olly shares the stories behind the new songs, the experience of recording at the iconic Konk Studios, and what keeps Turin Brakes inspired after more than 2 decades in music. So let's get into it. This is Olly Knights on the XS Noize Podcast. So hi Olly, welcome to the XS Noize Podcast.
Hi there, thanks for having me.
It's been 3 years since your last album, and now you're releasing your 10th studio record. How does it feel to be hitting that milestone with Spacehopper?
I started out one of the first ever interviews we did way back in 2000, I guess it would have been. I think it might have been for the NME at the time. I remember very flippantly saying, I think we'll be a 10 albums band, and I didn't really know what that meant, but I just liked the sound of it. There is a kind of funny personal milestone feeling about hitting album 10, definitely for me. But I think for all the guys in the band, there's something, it's only a number and it probably shouldn't matter really, but there's something about it being double figures and number 10. It's just like, whoa, it does encourage a bit of a kind of a looking back in some sense. And that we even let it kind of fuse into the record a bit, and some of the songs on the record. And there's a few little funny kind of, I guess, sort of in jokes or little funny Easter eggy moments for the band and for any fan who's mad enough to notice, our little in jokes about Turin Brakes history and stuff on the record. So yeah, we decided to kind of have a bit of fun with that whole idea of it being the 10th album.
You recorded Spacehopper at Konk Studios, the same place you made the Optimist LP 24 years ago. Did it feel like coming full circle or more like stepping into a time capsule?
Yeah, man, it was mind-blowing. We did it because we thought it would freak us out, and being a bit freaked out is generally quite a good thing for making a record. You definitely don't want to be just really too chilled and too kind of everything's great. I know it's a funny mindset, but it's like you want something to be making you feel a bit edgy in some ways, I think. And I think we sort of set ourselves up to have a guaranteed sort of oddness, by saying, well, look, one thing we haven't done yet is we've never gone back to Konk Studios. And it made such a big impression on us because it was our first record, and we made it there, and we didn't have a clue what we were doing the first time round. So we were, making a record almost by accident the first time round. So going back there was a lot of ghosts, even just the smell of the place, the look of the place, and it's all virtually untouched, like it's just like it was 25 years ago. So it was great because it really made us face a few things, and it also highlighted to us how far we've come. It's that thing of going back to a place, as an adult in some senses, when you went there on holiday as a kid and you go back and it puts you back in touch with yourself, but it also shows you, how far you've come. So a lot of things got kind of highlighted to us, and it all sort of became part of that record, really, I think.
On this record, you're working with Grammy winner Guy Massey. He must have brought a fresh energy. Was there a moment in the studio where something just clicked and changed the way a song evolved, or even surprised you creatively?
Yeah, I think, Guy definitely brings he brought in a new element that we'd worked with Guy on mixes. We'd got him to mix the album before this one. we really liked him and sort of kept him, you know, in our minds when it was like time to make another record. We thought, well, we could probably, if we made a co-production with Guy, he'd bring something new to the table that we might be able to bounce off. And so he did do that, and he kind of highlighted how you can use that studio, Konk, and how much you can use that room, and he treats the room. There's a lovely big live wooden room there that's everything's kind of wood. It's full of instruments, and it has that sort of almost churchy vibe to it, you know. And the first time we used that room to record in, we were obsessed with making it sound smaller and more like a bedroom, because that's what we knew, you know. And this idea of this big grand wooden room that has a very specific sound to it, it was all a bit too much for us the first time. So we kind of dulled it down and made it smaller with lots of baffling, and made almost like a mini kind of bedsit feeling inside, like almost like a film set inside this huge room, to make the Optimist. And that worked for us at the time because it was a bit too grand. But this time, working with Guy, who's worked at Konk a lot, he really exposed us to sort of, look, this is how you can use this room. And he would reamp lots of sound. So that means like taking a sound and sending it back through speakers into the huge room and recording what the room does to it, and then adding that back into the sound. So you get these layers of kind of the vibration of a large wooden room, and it builds up over many layers of sound. So you get this kind of new sonic space and identity. So I think that really blew me away, and I got really into that this time, listening to that and realizing that was happening. And that was a really great thing that Guy brought into it, that I think we probably wouldn't have done, because, you know, we don't go as deep sonically as someone like Guy Massey, who's, you know, that's what he does 100% of the time, basically. So yeah, he was a brilliant addition to the whole process, and definitely he brought things out of us, you know, definitely encouraged us to go down roads that we probably wouldn't have done without him. And when I listen back to this record, it's it's really got a different sonic imprint that's unique to itself, and that's hugely down to working with Guy.
The album is fantastic, and it does sound fantastic.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, it definitely. It doesn't sound like any other Turin Brakes album to me. When I listen to it, it's like, oh wow, yeah, that is completely unique to itself. And at this stage, that's what you want. You know, you just want each record to have its own. It just like kids, you know, you want them all to be themselves and to have their own identity. And as long as you're doing that, then I think you're doing your job. And Guy definitely helped us do that. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some of the songs. The album opens up with the message, you know, with vivid images of childhood, FM radio, bikes, and rainy day boredom. What inspired that nostalgic tone, and why did you choose that song to kick the album off?
I think we probably chose it because it's quite a friendly sort of song. I think it's quite inviting, and we wanted the record to, you know, we wanted a positive start. We have. I guess we are always kind of keeping it at some kind of an audience in mind, be it Turin Brakes fans or whoever in your head is listening to this record when you're making it. And so you do want like a friendly start, and that just felt like a nice way into the world. And it is kind of a nostalgic song, but again, it's got lots of little funny references to Turin Brakes. It starts off with the line, "The wires in the walls are humming some strange song." That is basically the conceptual headline for our second record, Ether Song. If if the whole vibe of Ether Song was about kind of invisible messages from this ethereal kind of, the ethereal part of the universe, and the stuff you can't really explain with language, but maybe you can through music. And it was kind of obsessed with all of that kind of imagery and ideas. So the very first line you get on this record is like immediately saying, "Do you remember? You know, do you remember the feeling of Ether Song?" And then there's other parts of this song where there's like some of the words are actually old titles of Turin Brakes songs coming in and out of the lyrics. So there's always this little twist of like, we're kind of traveling back in time through our own nostalgia for what we've done, and that is mixed up with our own nostalgia for our sort of 80s and 90s childhoods. You know, it was all a bit ET, it was all a bit BMXy, it was FM radios were like fascinating things, and tuning around on an FM radio and it had this magic feeling to it. Things weren't quite so immediate, so you'd have to maybe work a bit harder to connect with the world at large. And that first song really explores that feeling and that idea a bit. And so it was a nice way to begin the record, and it kind of sets you up for to understand. Oh, okay, that's where this record's concerns might be, you know.
Yeah, I really connected with that song as well, because it put me back to the 80s, my childhood, and the things that you said, you know, and playing out in the street, playing football until it got dark and stuff like that, which you don't get now.
It's definitely rarer. I agree, and it's difficult because you don't want to sound too much like you're saying, oh, the old days were great, and that's not what that song's saying at all. It's not saying that it was better. It's just saying that it was different, you know, and it's kind of it's probably, if you're interested in humanity and where we're going, it's important to at least acknowledge that, oh, things were pretty different back then culturally, you know, and things are very different now, and maybe that's changing us for better or for worse, you know. And it's a nice, it's just nice to stick a flag in that and say, this is how things were, this is where we came from, you know, and now we're here in this new place, and we're trying to work it out, and it's kind of trying to be worked out across this record, you know.
And the title track, Spacehopper, again, it feels super nostalgic and warm. I heard it was inspired by your daughters bouncing around on an actual space hopper in the sun. Can you tell me a bit about the moment, how that turned into a song?
Yeah, I used to have a caravan in a field in Essex that we'd go to a lot, and I was there with my kids, and it was a very kind of, this caravan's not it doesn't have electricity or anything like that, so it's really like back to the Stone Age practically when we used to go there. And I used to love going there in the summer and making my then much younger children come and sort of like, you know, exist in this place where it's like, well, once your phone's dead, it's not getting recharged. You know, it's like you're forced out of modernity a little bit. And I used to love that because, yeah, it made other things happen. You know, and suddenly, sure enough, they found this old space hopper and we blew it up, and it still worked. And then they were kind of bouncing around on this thing, and I think they played on this thing for like 8 hours or something ridiculous, and I could see they were just beaming and having the time of their lives. And it just seemed very significant at the time. So I always used to have a guitar sitting in the corner, and I picked up my guitar, and within a few minutes, Spacehopper, I was singing Spacehopper over some chords, and yeah, by the end of the day, I had a little song, and I didn't think that much more of it. I never really thought, oh, that will be something I'll use in the future. And then just when we were writing this record, and I was kind of scouring old ideas on my phone, that I realized I had a lot more phone recordings than I ever kind of realized I had. And Spacehopper turned up on one of those, and I listened to it, and I was like, actually, that could be interesting. So I sent it to Gail, and he liked it. And yeah, within a few days, that was sort of on the list of songs to kind of develop. And as soon as we played that as a band in my little studio, when we were kind of blueprinting up all the new songs, it was just immediately like, it made everyone smile, you know. And when that's one of the signs. It's like, if everyone's smiling or feeling something, we're onto something here. And that was one of the key sort of songs that did that, I think.
I suppose your phone probably has hundreds or maybe thousands of ideas. You know, would you just be doing something, or, you know, maybe going for a walk, and then just an idea comes into your head and you just record a melody or a lyric idea?
Yeah, that does happen. I mean, it's almost annoying, because like I'm the kind of, I have a really like obsessive brain. So once I'm in writing mode, I can't. It's like I can't function unless I get that idea onto something. And it used to be a little cassette recorder, and now I use my phone in the same way. You know, I just press record and try and get the melody or whatever it is, and then when I get home, I won't be able to stop thinking about it. And when I get home, maybe I'll find the chords that fit underneath it, or there might be like one or two words. I mean, that's just my favorite way to write songs, because that, again, harking back to the ethereal sort of plane, that to me is like, when you feel like a human radio when that's happening, and you feel like your antenna, for whatever reason, your aerial is up that day, and something from somewhere is beaming back down your aerial, and you got to make it real. You got to bring it to life, and that's my favorite thing about songwriting. Is it's absurdly odd. You know, it's not like anything else. I don't know where it's coming from. I still don't know really where it's coming from. But you feel like you are a radio, you know? That's the only way I can explain it. You're tuning these ideas in from wherever, and that's what's happening, you know?
Lazy Bones, it's such a unique concept. Extraterrestrials uncovering human remains. What's the metaphor behind that, and where did the idea come from?
There was a song that we recorded many years ago on there was a song called Starship, and there was a song called Full of Stars as well on the second record. Starship was on the Optimist LP, and Full of Stars was on Ether's song, and there was some ideas in there as well about kind of uncovering codes of DNA within people's bones, and the idea that maybe someday some extraterrestrial species will be able to kind of read our bones. And I always, that idea just stuck in my head for a long time. And I think Lazy Bones it's just going back into that idea, but from a newer perspective, or from me now as an older human, and sort of like seeing if that idea is still interesting to me, and it was, and out came that song. I just love that idea. I guess it's like a science fiction movie in my brain of that idea that long after humans are gone, maybe there'll be some sort of alien species able to kind of plug into our bits of DNA, our dust, whatever they find of us, and kind of reconstruct, and be able to read through that what was going on here. So that song, Lazy Bones, is kind of setting up this idea that it's kind of there's no one around anymore, you know, but somehow life is happening and being reconstructed by some extraterrestrial being, and that's enough, you know. That's a big lovely picture to have for a song to kind of weave its way around. And those kind of ideas, again, those were the sort of ideas we were singing about sometimes on our early records, and Lazy Bones deliberately sounds like those early records, you know. It deliberately goes back to that space, and we don't do that very often, you know. We're generally, as a band, we're sort of, it's all about, you know, what's new, but sometimes what's old can be new, you know. If it feels new, then it's new again. So that song's really kind of like deliberately going back to a classic Turin Brakes space, you know, in sonically and conceptually. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to be controversial here. I think aliens have always lived among us.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. Yeah, I mean, I like that idea. I like that idea a lot, you know. Who knows? I mean, I definitely think there's a lot of weirder stuff going on than we currently are able to explain. I'm definitely into that. And I think we'll find out one day. You know, we'll find out how it might be. We might not want to find out because it might be just terrifying. It might be terrifying to find out. But yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things where I don't know if I want to be around for the alien visitation or not, because it kind of depends if they're how nice they are. They might be pretty mean.
I want to talk about my favorite track, Horizon. It's a soaring anthemic chorus. It sounds built for live shows. Was that intentional during the writing process?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we. I don't think we were kind of thinking about the live shows while we made it, but I think it became apparent, like, while we were playing the original idea in this very room. Actually, we were kind of blueprinting that up, and again, that was like, it just felt like so utterly Turin Brakesy, especially the verses. It was just like, man, this just feels just so. It's like putting on an old pair of jeans that are your jeans, and then, but the chorus took us a lot longer to feel happy about. We kept messing about and changing the chorus, and we didn't really settle on it until the day we recorded it at Konk with Guy. We were like, we finally committed to, let's do it this way. And so I think Guy kind of brought out, and again, another element, especially you can really hear it on the chorus, that it's not, it's not where we would have gone necessarily on our own. And he pulled out a kind of, what was it? What would you say? It's like it's a widescreen feeling on that chorus that I think, hopefully it will work really well live. I think we will try and start bringing that into the shows at some point. So fingers crossed it'll actually translate,
Oh, it's a must. You definitely have to. I love it.
So I'll mention it to the guys, because that will keep it on our minds for when that happens. Yeah.
The closing track, What's Underneath, explores themes of self-depersonalization across 6 immersive minutes. What does that concept mean to you?
Yeah, that was taken from when I was one of my pretty early memories. Not like, I guess I was probably about 6-7 years old, maybe that age where you just start to become quite self-aware for the first time, really. But I always think before you're, when you're like up to about the age of 5, you're off. Well, I certainly was barely conscious somehow. I was kind of on auto, Suddenly I remember things changing, and it was, from my experience, it was pretty extreme. Like I remember suddenly becoming aware of mortality, the fact that time was already a thing that could run out, and that it freaked me out. Like it was a very visceral sort of experience. And for about 2 weeks, I was convinced that my mum and dad, suddenly I was convinced that they weren't my mum and dad. I was convinced that they were actors. I was convinced that my whole existence was some sort of play or a film or something. Something, there was some kind of trickery to it all. And it was bloody scary, because that's like, it's like I had a 7-year-old's brain trying to deal with this really weird stuff. And luckily for me, it didn't stay a permanent thing. I got over it, and I guess that was just my brain's way of trying to make sense of its own sudden realization of being a thing, a self-aware being. But I always remembered that feeling, and I always remembered that strange time. And I don't think I've ever written a song directly about it, but if for some weird reason it started to come out in What's Underneath. And I always remember I used to see this graffiti. Someone was writing What's Underneath around where I lived, and it was like they were obviously obsessed with writing this question. And I used to see it everywhere around this time, and I was convinced it was kind of the universe trying to ask me or talk to me about what was underneath, literally what was underneath everything, especially what was underneath myself. And so that makes its way into the song, and it becomes, that song's just, it's mad. Like it's huge. It's a big old journey, and it goes through. It's quite a proggy kind of feel to it, and it goes through this kind of strange, magical, folky middle eight where it turns into kind of a bit of a different song, and then it eventually brings itself all the way back around to where you start off. except this time it gets very heavy, and Gail goes into an extremely kind of psychedelic, full on guitar sort of breakout that where he takes the whole track off to the stars basically by the end of it. And that's kind of it's kind of the musical version of having that massive moment of self-realization where things are not necessarily what you thought they were, and it's quite trippy, and it feels like your world has suddenly exploded, and your understanding of the world has suddenly exploded. And that musically, I guess that starts to come out, so the end of that song is quite trippy and fun, and it goes a bit wild. And after that, we put that at the end of the record because you just can't come back from that. You know what I mean? It's like, well, what are you going to do after that? We've gone to Saturn. Well, are we going to go back to the Earth after that? So yeah, that's why that song's the last song, because there's nowhere else to go.
Yeah, Gail's guitar solo is absolutely tremendous. What was the mood in the studio when that moment came together?
Oh man, just glee. Like we kind of knew we had it roughly planned out, because we'd sort of done a very rough version of it in my studio, but we hadn't fully explored it, but we kind of knew. We left it in a tantalizing place where we had all felt like, oh, there's some gold in that song. And so once Gail, I think he did the guitar solo part, he was in the control room with us all, so we were all together, and he had an amp kind of in the large wood room, but he was playing it from the control room where we were. So we were all together, and we had the speakers on really loud, and we were sitting there with this incredible Neve desk. Everything was like primed and loud, and it just felt like we were kind of in the middle of our own show, but it felt like practically like a Pink Floyd show or something. It was massive, and man, it was just trippy and really good fun. And I was just looking over at Guy and just watching him, making sure that he was actually getting it. I was like, it was that thing of like, God, don't let this slip, because this is just like a couple of hours of just amazing stuff going on. And Gail was having a great time, and being allowed to kind of really, just go full on with what he was doing and fully explore. And it was that was one of my favorite days at the studio. It was super exciting.
Yeah, it's a fantastic track to end the album. Absolutely.
One of the things I love about that track, as well as the face melting guitar solo at the end, was it's just really funky. It's got this great inner groove. I always think Turin Brakes are a bit funkier than a lot of bands that we came out with. Like that's I guess if I had to say what's a unique thing about Turin Brakes, I'd say there's always we're always looking for something in the grooves that's just got a little bit of funk to it, and you can really hear it in that song, where it's just got this groove that really makes you, it's almost like slow dancing groove, and we always find that in things whenever we can. I think it's just the chemistry of the way we are with each other, but musically. But that's a really good example of that. Of a there's a kind of funk to it that I just love. I love that, and it's an important part of what makes us who we are, I think, as a band.
You're heading out on tour soon, supporting Deacon Blue in arenas, plus your own headline shows with Tom Spate. How are you feeling about taking Spacehopper on the road?
I think we're feeling pretty good about Spacehopper, because the great thing about the way we made it this time that really helps when it comes to the live shows is it was very much a live record. We set up as a live band, recorded as much of it as we could in a live setting. So we'd set up just like we do at a show: drums, bass, guitars. I was off in my own little vocal booth, so I could be sonically separated from the band, but I was singing and playing live, and we kept loads of those early live takes. We'd add to them. We'd add embellishments. Maybe I'd change something afterwards a little bit, but it really has that. It has the chemistry of the live band, and that was something we talked about before we even made it. Was like, let's try and make a record where it feels a little like when we're playing live, because people are always coming up to us after shows and saying, "You guys sound better live than you do on album. Like, I love your records, but live, it's like there's another layer of energy, or something's happening live that." And we always take that one to heart, and we always think, God, we've got to try and find a way to capture some of that stuff that happens when we're playing live. Can we get that onto a record a little more than we have done in the past? So that was a bit of a challenge for us this time. That was something we used as a sort of like touchstone to make sure that, does this feel like it does when we're playing live as a band? And hopefully it does. I don't think you can ever quite get there, because there's something so unique about performing to an audience, that stuff happens that you just can't create any other way. But I think this album gets close, which is pretty good going, because any closer and it would just have to be a live album,
Are there any tracks you're especially excited to play live? I've mentioned Horizon, and Lullaby as well would be another good one. It would really hit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Lullaby's got that kind of energy that I think will come out live really really well. I definitely like the idea of playing What's Underneath, just because it's such a crazy journey. I love it when we can do something longer than your classic 3-minute pop song, where you're allowed to really take the audience on a journey that might really transport them, so they come, by the time you finish that song, they're different people somehow to how they were 6 minutes ago. I love that. So that's another track that I'm really looking forward to. But as I said, the whole record lends itself to the live experience, I think. So I'm hoping we can play quite a lot of it live. We'll see if our fans let us, We're always aware of, like, you can't indulge too much, but we're pretty good at like slipping in new material into gigs. We usually find a way to get at least half the record played live, So hopefully that we'll be allowed to do that, as well as throwing in all the old classics.
Olly, let's run through a sort of quick fire round. I'll name a Turin Brakes album, and you share the first memory, feeling, or story that comes to mind. So we'll have to start off with the Mercury Prize-nominated Optimist LP from 2001.
A memory, the first thing I can think of that comes to mind is looking through the door to Konk Studios. When you walk into the control room, had like a porthole kind of window in it. It still does, I think. And I remember we just kind of finished recording the Optimist LP. It was before it was mixed. It was just in a kind of pretty raw state, and it was all very new. We'd never recorded a record before. We'd never been signed to a record label. We had all these weird feelings of like needing to live up to something. These people had put their trust in us, and it financed the making of this record. And I looked through this porthole, and there were like 3 people from the record label and a bunch of other people that were working with us, and the manager, and they were all new, and I could see them listening to the work we'd done. And I remember I was utterly terrified. And I remember actually I almost started crying looking through this porthole and thinking, oh God, they hate it. We've completely fucked it up. What the hell were we doing? Like, why did we think we could do this? How crazy are these people that they were investing in us and expecting us to be able to create a record? Anyway, I walked away, gathered myself, and then plucked up the courage to kind of walk back in the room, and it was the complete opposite. And they were all blown away and just said, wow, we didn't expect it to be this good. You guys have made something super special here. This is going to be like the most important record we put out as a label this year. So I went from being convinced that we'd completely screwed everything up and being packed full of self-doubt, to the reality being, the complete opposite. And that's the memory I get right now when I think about making that record and how wrong your mind can be. You know, shouldn't necessarily trust the doubts in your head.
I must ask you about my entry point for Turin Brakes was, believe it or not, Dark on Fire, Ethan John's produced album from 2007. What can you tell me about that? What comes into your head?
Okay, so this is relates to what I just said. The exact opposite. I remember I remember us playing that. We were in Olympic Studios in Barnes, which is this beautiful classic old studio where like people like the Stones and every kind of great British act had made a record in this building. You know, it was like famous old studio. And there we are with Ethan, who's like a very revered producer who we loved and, you know, big fans of. And we played in exactly the same way. We played the record for Virgin, the label, and I kind of looked around and I just saw they all looked a bit bemused and a bit like there was something really weird in the air. And I said it to Gail. I was like, do you think like they seemed like really weirded out and like they didn't know how to behave? And we kind of, you know, we got on with it and thought, okay, well, we'll find out pretty soon. Anyway, about a few weeks later, it turned out that like most of them knew their jobs were on the line, basically because Virgin had been quietly kind of bought out by. In fact, it wasn't just Virgin; it was the whole of EMI by this company called Terra Firma, and quite a famous chap who owns that called Guy Hands, and he was famous for kind of buying out failing companies and turning them around. Anyway, it turned out that they all knew that they were basically on the verge of getting canned. So it was that was actually why they looked so freaked out, because they were listening to a record that they knew they probably weren't even gonna get to barely put out or get to work on. And it was a very odd time at that label. And sure enough, you know, within weeks of us putting that record out, our label kind of had practically disintegrated before our eyes. You know, everyone was getting fired and it was a very, very crazy time. And sure enough, that was the last record we put out for Virgin EMI. And our whole lives kind of changed a bit after that, because we had to get into being an independent band. Suddenly the plug was pulled and we were on our own, you know? So yeah, it was very significant, but yeah, it's ironic that you brought up that record, because it was the exact opposite of what had happened on the first one, basically.
Well, you came back in 2010 with Outbursts. It was a return to a more acoustic cinematic style.
Outbursts was like picking myself up off the floor after being sort of punched by the reality of kind of losing our label and losing really the whole structure that we'd begun to really rely on for putting music out, and for, you know, even literally down to the people, everyone we'd worked with and who'd been very much in on the project suddenly were just nowhere to be found. They were all gone, fired, moved on with their lives to different labels, or stopped working in the music industry altogether. And Outburst was me. The beginnings of Outburst was just me, not even with Gail, actually, just on my own, sitting in our very, very basic little recording space that we had made for ourselves in Brixton, and just seeing what would come out, you know. And I sort of, I knew things were never going to be the same again, and at the time I remember it felt like Turin Brakes was over. It felt like there was almost no point in putting out a record, because we'd been dropped off the cliff. You know, we didn't know we didn't know how to get a record deal. It was not a good time, and the music industry itself was in absolute chaos, because, you know, CD sort of physical media was absolutely dying. It was clear as anything. Nobody knew how things were going to work, so there was a lot of risk-averse record labels at the time that weren't signing people, and it felt like just a bad time to be trying to make new music with the idea of putting it out, you know. But nevertheless, there was a load of songs in me. So I just started making a record. I just started doing it anyway, because I didn't, that's what I was going to do anyway. I realized it's like, well, I'll do it just for the hell of it because I don't know what else to do. And it wants to come out. So Outbursts was exactly that. It started off almost like a solo record in a way. But then once it began to turn into something, I played it to Gail, a few very early drafts of things, and he quite liked it. I think he couldn't help himself but start to add things in, and before we knew it, we were making another Turin Brakes album, and it was a lovely thing, really, because despite all the chaos and negativity around us, we realized our way out of it was to make a record. That's what Outbursts is. It's us going, well, we'll get out of this by actually making a record, and sure enough, by the end of it, we'd found a new label and a new way to be, which we're still with that same label now. And yeah, a very different time. Everything had to get a lot smaller. Overheads had to get a lot smaller. Our whole system had to be rejigged into a way that we could do it and still survive. But it was also the key moment. And I think a lot of our peers that were on that label stopped for good around that time. I always remember the Thrills, they were kind of our label mates, and we knew them a bit, and they stopped. A lot of other acts stopped completely because they just couldn't see the point in it was so hard. It was so hard to keep going. But I think the key for us was we couldn't stop making music, and so we made that record, and it saved us. That record saved us, and it's kind of a lesser known record because it was the first one on a much smaller indie label. It had a much smaller release, but arguably it's one of the most, or if not the most important record apart from the first one for us, because it was the bridge from major label life down to something new that was very much self-driven, and we've been in that self-driven working environment ever since.
Yeah, I love that record. And one thing that amazes me about that record, or those collection of songs, there's one song. It was actually a bonus track, "Endless Freeze Frame," and it's not on the physical version. And it's just such an amazing track, and it's really hard to find now unless you get it. Some streaming services have it, and I'm like, that is such a great song. Why was that not included in the main body of work of the album?
At the time, no one gave a shit about it apart from me. Quite frankly, no one. I played that to people, and no one cared. It was just weird, and it was a weird song. No one got it, so I probably didn't fight for it as much as I should have done. It was actually a really important song to me because it was one of the first ones that kind of came with all those songs on that record. But for whatever reason, maybe it was a little. It just didn't quite seem to fit the puzzle of that record quite right, and so it became became the classic kind of thrown into the B-side bucket, or the whatever they were calling B-sides at that point. And it's a shame because I dig that song. It's more of a conceptual piece. It reminds me more of the kind of stuff I was making films about before I signed a record deal, and I was at film school, and I figured I was going to be a filmmaker. That song is more in that kind of realm. It's much more of an experimental kind of song. It's not a traditional sort of song the way it works, and so I guess maybe it was just a little too out there for some reason for everyone else. Because being in a band, it's not just me. There's me, Gail, and then there's Rob and Ed, and then there's whoever's managing us and whoever's working with us. They all need to feel that things translate, and sometimes you have to take one for the team. You can't always just cling on to something just because it makes sense to you. And that's just one of those songs that for whatever reason, but I'm really glad you remember it. So it must have meant something. I
love it. It's one of my favorite Turin Brakes songs. It's fantastic, and it's good for bands to have those sort of deep cuts, or sort of undiscovered songs, and people discover, somewhere, I was trying, it wasn't on the physical version, it was on one of the streaming services, but then it disappeared and then it came back. I found it again on Apple, and I was just so
Okay.
pleased.
Yeah, I don't know why. It's every now and then I'll get an email from someone saying, "Oh, your stuff gone from Apple. This has gone. That's come back." I have no idea who's in control of this stuff. Why certain bits of the catalog pop up and then disappear. I guess they're all buying and selling catalog and doing all sorts of things behind the scenes. That means that sometimes things disappear and sometimes they reappear depending on who owns the old stuff. It just gets passed along the chain by labels and selling to other labels, selling to other labels, selling more and more of their back catalogue. So your stuff is part of that, and there's nothing you can do. We signed a record deal. It's we don't own that stuff. It's someone else's property, and so it gets passed around. And I wish I could have control of all of our work, because if I did, I'd put it all in one place in a really nice, neat pile and say, here it all is, everyone. And it's a free for all. It's all equal. There's no, they're all equal now. You can just, but unfortunately things seem to come and go. And yeah, it's a frustrating thing when you've been around putting out music for as long as we have. Stuff gets swallowed up into various holes, and there's nothing you can do about it. But hope that it will turn back up again somewhere else.
For someone discovering Turin Brakes for the first time, which 5 songs would you recommend to really understand the essence of your music?
Oh, blimey! I'd definitely throw "Feeling Oblivion" in there. I think that song sums up a lot of what we're about musically and what we're about emotionally. There's a rawness to it emotionally. It's about being it's about the loneliness of the human condition, if you like, but also musically it's saying we're going to make quite a lot out of very little. We're not gonna kind of we're not going to just throw everything that sticks at this because we can. There is a feeling of it being born from a couple of guitars, a couple of harmonies, and then whatever else is brought in is there because it has to be. It's not there just because it could be, So there is a certain something about that song. And then there's probably a lot on the first album that's still important. Mind Over Money's another clear moment. I would say you got to listen to that because it jumps from the world of Feeling Oblivion into something much more, I don't know, much more aggressive and bigger, and it kind of showed where this music was gonna go, that song, because it starts off again very just a vocal and a guitar and very, very, very personal, but when the drums kick in, it's like, oh, and this is, we're also like here to be a progressive rock band. It's not just Simon and Garfunkel, it's also something else, and so that's an important one. Ether Song, the actual track Ether Song, that is the title track. It started off as a secret track on the CD because our label hated it, and we did a deal with them where we said, look, it's going on the record, but we'll make it the secret track, and they agreed to allow us to do that because again, it was too out there for them. They just didn't get it. They wanted us to they wanted us to give them 3-minute pop songs, and we love 3-minute pop songs, and sometimes we've been good at making them, but we also love the complete opposite. That's the thing about Turin Brakes, is it kind of all needs to be allowed to happen. But that's a really important song. I think Ether Song, again, it shows how expansive the band can be. It really the whole world of it really opens up, and there's an experimental heart to it that I really love. It's not just trying to be a version of something that came before. There's something quite unique about it, and it doesn't really sound like anything else. So that's an important song. And then after that, I mean, God, I don't know. There's so many. There's a song called Black Rabbit that was on Lost Property many years later. That is, again, it's pushing at the edges of what Turin Brakes is and could be and is meant to be, and something else where it's being pushed into something new. It's very progressive, lots of fireworks sonically, but the heart of it is really personal and emotive in terms of the songwriting. So those two, the epicness of the music and the smallness and personalness of the lyric, those two worlds coexist amazingly well. Even though they're at the opposite ends of the spectrum. I think but if Turin Brakes were to get it wrong, the lyrics would match the music more, and that would be a bad thing. What I love about Turin Brakes is the lyrics are often the complete opposite of what's going on sonically, and somehow that really is very Turin Brakes, and it really works. Rob, our drummer, always says it's like an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. So it's a beautiful velvet glove, but inside it's Mike Tyson's coming at you, and I love that. And there is that contrast in Turin Brakes, and so certain songs have sort of get that. It just really exposes that, and they're probably my favorite moments. I don't know how many that is. That might be about four. What would be a fifth one? It's got to be something off the new album, I guess. Really, I'd probably say, like, for me, there's another side again of the band where there's a kind of newer element to something like It Pays to Be Paranoid. There's a new song on the record called Pays to Be Paranoid, and it's about now times. It's much more about being in your 40s and being kind of looking at the mess of the world, and it's a much angrier side to the band that probably didn't exist 25, or it would have been very different 25 years ago. And I think that's a modern element to the band that's been allowed to come in, and that so that if you listen to that track, you'd get again another side of this band that might be a little new. So yeah, there you go. That's 5 tracks. It could be all different by tomorrow. I'd probably change my mind in 5 minutes, but right now, at this very second, that's the 5 tracks.
Yeah, well, the tracks that you mentioned, span folk, rock, pop, country, even prog. Do you think that genre blending has helped your longevity?
It's a funny one because I think there was always a lot of pressure on us to be less imaginative in some ways as a band, because I think we're hard to explain. People always say, Turin Brakes, how would you describe your sound? And it's 25 years down the line, and I can't describe what Turin Brakes is, not really. And it's always a letdown to try and say, well, do you like Coldplay? Well, if you took a little bit of Coldplay and then you mixed it with a bit of these guys and those guys, it never works. It never gets what Turin Brakes is. And I think Turin Brakes it's always been on the outside, always. There's never been a genre or a movement in music where it's fitted in. Even in the very first days when they called us part of the new acoustic movement was the kind of thing that we were apparently part of. We never played by the rules then, because that was more like the Kings of Convenience, who were 2 guys with acoustic guitars and doing beautiful harmonies, and they were very aware of being these kind of acoustic new acoustic movement dudes, and they were very happy to be that, I think, at the time. But we really weren't. We were like, man, as soon as they said that, it made us turn up the amplifiers louder and rock out much harder, because we were like, that's not what we are. I don't know what we are, but it's not that. Every time someone tried to pin it down, we'd kind of couldn't help but work against it. I do think it's why we're still around. I think people, they see us as an artistic band with merit that has real value to its art. And I think that's because we've stuck to our guns. But it probably hasn't helped us commercially as much. I think we'd have a few more zeros after our sales figures from the first couple of records if we'd have been better kind of like marketing ourselves from, and understanding that confusing people isn't necessarily the most commercial way to behave, um, but man, that's someone else's job. I went to art school, so like my whole thing, Turin Brakes was already towing the line more than maybe I naturally wanted to, even at the beginning, when we were trying to behave ourselves. So there's always been a little bit of an experimental kind of element to Turin Brakes, and it's not always obvious, but it's there. It's there if you care to look, and I think that's actually ended up being why people still trust us, because not everything we do might be everyone's cup of tea, but I think you can't say that it doesn't have any kind of depth to it. It's everything we do has a certain level of artistry and depth, I think, and I'm glad we did that. I'm glad we did that rather than tried too hard to be slick and give people what we thought they wanted too much and too quickly, because I don't think that would have worked in the end.
Well, you're doing something okay. You're 10 albums in, over 1 million records sold, and you're still finding new sounds.
Yeah, it's pretty good. When you sum it up like that, it's not too bad. It makes me feel like it was, the main thing I like about it is that I feel like, well, I was here for a reason. I was here for a reason, and that was to do this stuff. And I know that makes me lucky. I know that I have friends that don't feel like that, and they're much more like, what the hell am I here for? What am I about? I at least get to sort of have a feeling when I'm like, yeah, that's why I'm here. That's what it's about for me, and so I'm really grateful for that. And I think we're quite lucky humans to have found something, that the world seems to value a bit, and we're just so lucky, because I know that's not standard.
Just a couple more left, Ollie. I like to ask my guests the following questions. What song or album, when you listen to it, brings back the best memories for you?
Oh man, probably listening to something like Hejira by Joni Mitchell, which was, I can't remember how many albums in it was, but it was like, I think she put it out in around 76, which is when I was born. And about 17 or 18 years later, I discovered that record. My sister gave me a cassette that had been dubbed from a vinyl version of that record that she'd found in my parents' vinyl collection. And she gave it to me and said, "Oh yeah, check this out." And it just reminds me of, I was doing a foundation at Chelsea Art School, and I'd just left my normal school, and all of my mates were doing, A levels or going to work or whatever. And I was this sort of little freak that had decided I was going to go and do fine art, which was, no one I knew really outside of my family was into that. And so I was wandering around Chelsea, and it was all very glamorous and exciting, and I was listening to that record. And so it will always remind me of that feeling of kind of potential as a 17, 18-year-old kid with that. And I listened to that music, and that record is so about personal journey, and it always takes me back to that place. And it's just the most, oh God, it will never not be great, that record. It's one of those records you can just put it on and you are instantly transported. It's amazing, that album. I never stop shutting up about that record. Turin Brakes fans must be bored of hearing me mention that record by now, but it's just like up there in the absolute top few records of all time for me. That.
If you could relive one musical moment from your career so far, what would it be?
I wouldn't mind going back to the Glastonbury main stage in 2003 and reliving that 45 minutes or whatever it was we had. Maybe we had an hour. We were on I think we were on before Radiohead headlined on the Pyramid stage. And there must have been, I don't know how many people there were, but there were, I don't know, 40 or 50,000 odd people watching us. But I was so high on the situation that I can't remember anything about it. I look at video, and it's like I it's like someone that all happened to someone else, you know. So I wouldn't mind like going back and actually kind of just for a few seconds, actually taking a breath and looking around and appreciating, like looking at my bandmates who are my old pals, and then looking out and just kind of thinking, we made it. Like look at where the music has put us. It's put us here, you know. And I didn't do that at the time. I was far too nervous and worried and scared that we were going to let someone down or whatever, you know. And I just wish I could have taken it in more and just been able to say, don't worry, it's all kind of going to be okay. Just enjoy it. Like this is it. This is great. And yeah, because it's just such a blur.
Brilliant. Well, Ollie, that's me done. Is there anything you would like to mention before we wrap up?
Oh no, man! I've mentioned more than enough. I feel I've talked your ears off. So hopefully you've got enough in there.
That's the point. That's the point of the podcast.
Good.
It's been great. So, if you want to tell anybody, listen, how they can get the album when it's released.
Yeah. So, Jack. So when's it released? I think Spacehopper's released on the 23rd, I believe, of May, unless the label have changed it without telling me, but I'm pretty sure that's when it's released. And it will be, it's out on a whole bunch of different vinyl versions of it. Not too many because we don't want to take the piss, but maybe just enough to keep things interesting. And yeah, it's our 10th album, and hopefully people will love it. You know, we definitely feel as strongly about making new music as we always did. So from our end, it's business as usual. We're putting out some art, and I hope the world, you know, I hope it clicks. I hope it clicks with our fellow humans. Let's see.